Hi everybody, this is Brian and I'm back with a Fusion 360 quick tip. That's right, today we're going to be talking about the pattern tool. Patterning can be incredibly important. It expedites and makes drawing very efficient, so you don't have to do multiples of the same feature or the same sketch over and over and over again. Patterning can happen in one of two places. It can either happen in your sketch, or it can happen after you've already created a feature. You can pattern that tool. It can also happen in one of three other ways, one being a linear pattern or a rectangular pattern, one being a polar pattern or a pattern around a center axis point, and the third way being a pattern that follows along a path. So I'm going to quickly kind of show you how to approach all of those different methods of using the pattern tool. So we'll start with the simplest version, which is doing a square pattern within the context of a sketch. So I'm in Fusion 360, I'm going to create a new sketch. I'm just going to use my ground plane, and I'm going to first create just some geometry that I can work within. So we'll make a rectangle here. I'll give it some dimensions. We'll make it 100 by 100. Nice, lovely square profile. There we go. And so that's my sketch. And now let's think about the thing we want to pattern. So let me say, like, let's cut a little rectangle out of this thing, or a series of rectangles rather. So I'll use a 2-point rectangle, and I'm just going to drop a rectangle right here, and let's give that some dimensions as well, just to make sure it's fully defined. Make this 10 by 10. Makes our math easy. Oh, it's pinned. There we go. It gave me the error. It was going to over constrain it. It's because I pinned it right along this axis, which identifies that as a square. There we go. Isn't that clever? Fusion was cleverer than I was. And then we need to locate this thing. So let's give it a dimension from this edge. We'll give it a dimension of 10. Let's keep it all lovely 10s. There we go. Okay, so let me say I want to take this and I want to create a pattern inside the sketch. So this would be really beneficial if that pattern is going to run all the way through your geometry. Like if I have these square holes that project through this. You could also use it to cut these out of a thing. If you were going to try to cut out a partial square, like partially down the depth of a bigger block, I would recommend using the feature version of this, which I'll show you here in just a minute. Okay, so now that I have the thing that I want to pattern, now I'm going to go ahead and actually pattern it. So I'm going to go back up here to my Create menu. I'm going to go down to Rectangular Pattern. And I have a bunch of different things. So objects, it's first asking me to select the things that I want to pattern. I'm going to go ahead and select all 4 of these guys there. I'm selecting that square. Now it's asking me to select direction/directions. So what that means is I can create a pattern just along this axis, so I can put like 4 of these squares this way, or I can create an array of squares, right? So I can have it go both this way and this way, so I fill this whole thing with squares. That's obviously the more complicated version, so I'll show you that. Obviously, if you can do the more complicated, you can probably do the simpler version. So I'm going to switch my selection set down here to directions, and I'm going to choose what it's asking for is a line along which you want to pattern it. So if I want to just do a straight grid pattern, I need to choose a line going in this direction and a line going in that direction. Hence the reason it's asking for directions. If I just wanted to put a row of squares across here, I could just choose one. If I wanted these to go at an angle, I could actually choose like an angled line for my direction. But in this case, I want to make a nice, lovely grid of squares. So I'm going to choose that, and I'm going to choose that. So what that's going to open up is the possibility to go in 2 different directions. Under distance type, there's 2 options here. There's extent or spacing. So extent means you can say like, oh, within a distance of 90 or let's say 80 millimeters, I want you to put 5 of these things. The other option is to say, I want you to create these with a 10 unit spacing between them. They both work fine, so I'll show you extent first. So I choose extent. Quantity, I want to do 3, and we'll say we want to do 3 within 80 millimeters. And you'll see that it's giving me those 3, and it's 80 millimeters from this point to this point, from the same point. So middle to middle would be 8, middle of this square to middle of this square would be 80. So 80 is maybe a little bit too big. Let's try 60. If I want to do 3 within 60, there we go. That spaces them out relatively nicely. And then you can just increase the quantity here of the number that you want. So that would be the extent option. The other option is the spacing option. And because I've already given it the extent, it's done the math for me, and it said like, oh, okay, if you want 4, they're gonna be 20 millimeters apart. And so I could say like, if I want to do 5, it's gonna now push that extra one there, and the distance between them. So again, this is edge to edge or center to center is gonna be 20 millimeters. So I could shrink that down to 10 millimeters, and then they're gonna be touching, right? They literally are sharing because it's 10. This is a 10 millimeter block, right? So I could change this to 15, and you'll see how that changes the outcome there. But let's do 4, and we'll do 4 with a 20 millimeter spacing. And actually, let's do 4 with a 25 millimeter spacing. Oh, that doesn't work. 22 millimeter spacing. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just trying to get that to land where I want it to land, kind of in the same place on the other side. Oops. There we go. That's pretty close. So that gives me the direction, the one direction. Then I'm going to do direction type the second direction now. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do 4, because again, this is symmetrical, and the distance between them is going to be 23.5. And you'll notice now we get that grid because the second direction is going this way, and it propagates those rectangles across, or those squares across that pattern to give me the full grid of those squares. At this stage, you'll notice these all have checks. That relates to this concept of suppress. And if I uncheck that, you'll notice those checks disappear. And what suppress allows you to do is you can create a pattern, but say like, for some reason you don't want a rectangle there or a rectangle there. So you can suppress those features in that grid. It allows you to do a pattern, a much larger pattern, and then take away the ones you don't want specifically, or you can add those back in depending on what you want to do. Direction type, this is one direction versus symmetrical. If you do it symmetrical, it'll take this one and it'll move in both directions. Obviously in this case, it's an even number, so it's really hard for it to do symmetrical about an even number. And because it's choosing this one as my starting point, it's trying to go this way. There's nothing over here to draw those squares on. You're actually out of your geometry at that point. But that's the difference between the one direction and symmetric. So this looks pretty good, so I click OK. That locks in that geometry. I can finish the sketch, and now if I do an extrude, I can either choose this surface, right, and that allows me to just extrude that surface up to create a lovely grid, right? So there you have it. That's patterning with the sketch with the rectangular pattern. All right, let's do another version of this. We'll close this up. I'm not going to save this. We'll do another version of this where we do kind of the same thing in a sketch with a round pattern. So let's create a sketch on that surface. I'm going to go back to my center rectangle because I want to be using the origin point. There we go. We can do the same thing. Let's give this some dimensions, 100 by 100. And then I'm going to just drop in a circle here, kind of set up on that midpoint, and we'll give that a dimension, I don't know, let's say 15. There we go. And I need to give this a distance just to fully define it from there to there. We'll say 15. There we go. And I'm going to do this let's grab this guy. Okay, I can actually just make this guy and this guy. We can make them horizontal and vertical. There we go. Okay, so now I can go to create, and this time I can go to circular pattern. Objects, I want to select this circle, the center point, that's about which I want to rotate. That's going to be this point here, right? This one's really easy, and then I can just choose like how many of those circles do you want to fill in that 360-degree area. You'll notice the type here is full. You can tell it, I want to do an angle, and then it'll ask you what's your total angle. So maybe I want to do 6 and 180 degrees, right? In this case, I want those to go all the way around, so I'm going to go to that full side of things. That suppress feature, just like in the rectangular pattern, is there, so I can uncheck that. They disappear. I can leave it checked, and then I can say, oh yeah, I don't want that one for some reason. You have those options to do that. And that's it. Click OK, finish my sketch, and same deal, right? I can extrude this guy, pull this up, and it's going to extrude that pattern of holes. You'll notice that in this case, those holes go all the way through that surface, and that's what I'm saying. If you only want the holes to go partially into the surface, it would be better to pattern a feature, which is almost identical, and we'll talk about that next. All right, so I'm going to close this up. Don't save it. I'm going to open a new one, create a sketch on that bottom surface. I'm going to create a rectangle again. I'm going to use the center rectangle again. We'll give this some dimensions. I don't know why you need to do that. I just don't feel. Okay, so I'm going to finish that sketch, and I'm going to extrude that guy. I don't know. We'll give it 35. That sounds good. All right, so that creates my geometry. Now I can go ahead and do that same dealio again. So I'm going to create a sketch on the surface, and this time I'm only going to do one feature. So let's say I'll put that guy there. We'll give this some dimensions. 15 sounds good. We'll dimension it from the corner. Dink, dink. We'll make that 10, and we'll make this 10. There we go. So we're fully defining that sketch. Finish the sketch. All right, so there's my circle, and now I'm going to go ahead and cut that in, or I can bring it up. Doesn't matter if you want to stick it in or bring it up. Sure, we'll extrude it out. We're making like a kind of Lego brick. Okay, so this is identical to what we did with the rectangular pattern tool. So I'm going to go to create. I'm going to go to pattern, rectangular pattern, pattern type. You want to select, if in this case I want to select features, so I'm going to select features. I can choose that feature either by clicking on it here or clicking on it down in my timeline. You could select multiple features. If you had like a circle and a square, you could pattern circle, square, circle, square, circle, square too, if you needed to do that. Directions, this is identical to what we did before, so I'm going to select, click here, and click here. That way I can make a grid. I'm going to do the spacing option again, and I want to do, let's do 5, and we'll put 10 between them. Oh, that's not enough because they're, okay, let's do 25 between them. Whoops, not 125, 25. And we can do 4. There we go. So it's kind of giving you that phantom shadow there of what they're going to look like. Again, the same things exist. You can do one direction, you can do symmetrical, and I'm going to do the same thing in the other direction. So I'm going to do 4 with 25 between them. And that's going to make my grid. Same deal. You notice suppress is there. I can say like, oh, I want everything except for this one and that one, and I'll deselect those, and I click OK, and then lo and behold, I have that lovely pattern, right? So that is how to do it using patterning a feature. And now the last one I'm going to do is a circular pattern or a polar pattern, doing this same process. So I'm actually going to just rewind here. Let's rewind my timeline. Yeah, let's go back here and edit this sketch. And the one thing about this that's a little bit different, I'm going to select you, and I'll select you, and I'm going to make you horizontal to one another. And let's give you a dimension here, just between the edge. Let's give it 50. Just bring it away from the edge. Okay. So same deal. I'm going to do that thing. This sketch is turned off. That's where it is. That's sketch 2. There we go. And we'll extrude this guy up. So there we have that little nub. It is now its own feature. I'm going to delete this guy just so we don't have any problems. Okay, so there's my feature. Now I'm going to do that polar array, or the circular array. So go to pattern, go to circular pattern. The difference here, and this is why this is more complicated, is features. This is normal. I'm going to select my feature. I want this guy, right? But now I need an axis. So it can't just orbit around a single point. It's got to orbit around an axis. So if I go to select here, I drew my rectangle using a center rectangle command, which gives me control of this existing axis, right? That's one of my origin, right? It's this. Which one is that? Is it my z-axis? Yeah, it's my z-axis. So it's my z-axis. If you drew your rectangle from a corner rectangle, you need to draw in an axis. So you could do that with a construction line on a plane that goes through the middle of that, but that adds that extra step. In this case, I don't need to do it. I'm going to choose that axis point, and I can do 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There we go. I want to do 8 of those, right? There we go. And that gives me that lovely pattern in a circular sense. Okay? So hopefully that is helpful. That explains pattern, how you can use it, and a bunch of different ways to approach patterning, either in a sketch or using it as a feature. I'll be back with another quick tip on doing the shell command following this video, so make sure you tune in there. All right, hope this was helpful. Bye.